Coming up on the Raven's Knock, I have a story that was recommended by a listener. Her name is Marcella. So, shout out to Marcella. Thank you for this story. However, this was one that really set my blood on fire. So, what would you do when you see a child who you think is being abused or neglected, but you're really not sure and you just met these people? Do you want to be the ones to report it and take the chance of them finding out that it's you? Well, join me as we find out on just what happens when you don't. Please note that the content of this recording may contain graphic material, including torture, and explicit language may be used. The opinions are of my own and may be offensive to some listeners. They are my opinions. Everyone has them, and if you do not agree, then ignore them like an adult and move on. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Hey, Ravens. Welcome to the Ravens Knock. I'm your host, Amy. I want to thank you guys for liking, sharing, and subscribing, and also referring your friends. If you're not a premium member, you can do so for $7 a month, which is like a cup of coffee. It does help the show out, as podcasting is not free. And you get ad-free content, bonus episodes that no one else gets. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started. At the time of her death on March 4th, 2010, Natalie DeBlaze was 4.5 years old, and her brother, Jonathan Chase, who goes by Chase, was 3.5. Their father, John DeBlaze, 25 years old, enjoyed a normal childhood in the Mobile, Alabama area. He attended public schools, graduated high school, and in 2003, he earned a regular diploma. After high school, John worked several jobs and began a relationship with Corianne Heathcock. Soon, Natalie was born on November the 4th, and in June 2006, John and Corianne married, and Chase was born on December 29th. The marriage was rough though. A lot of up and downs, a lot of separations, and a lot of getting back together. During this time, John became involved with wrestling as a hobby, and he had a close circle of friends with the same interest. During a separation from Corianne, one of his wrestling friends moved in with John to help with living expenses. Corianne returned to the home, and they began a secret relationship. Corianne eventually left, and John ended up moving in with his parents, Richard and Ann DeBlaze. Corianne kept the children until John filed for divorce in May 2009. The children then lived with John and his parents. The divorce was final in June 2009, with John having primary physical custody of their children. Corianne could not provide for the children at the time, but she had regular visitation with the children, and John was totally okay with it. So it wasn't like a nasty contested divorce or anything. Natalie and Chase were normal, happy children. Medical records indicate that they were seen by the doctor on their regular scheduled visits, and they were very healthy. There is no evidence of the children being mistreated or abused at this time. Corianne had lost contact with the children on November 17, 2009. At that time, Corianne felt that John was a proper and caring parent for Natalie and Chase. She had no concerns about the safety of the children, but yet for some reason she failed to maintain contact. I don't understand why, but I couldn't find anything indicating that she had even put any effort into this, or what, if anything, kept her from trying to see or contact them. I mean, regardless of how great of a parent he is, don't you want to see your kids? Talk to them? I mean, I'm sure they want to talk and see you. In October 2008, John met Heather Keaton through a social media website. She was enrolled as a student at Spring Hill College in Mobile on a scholarship. She was visually impaired. Heather's vision is impaired by aniridia, a posterior cataract, glaucoma, and nystagmus. Even though the impairment of Heather's vision is extreme, she's still able to do things like she can read up close, she can write, she can cook meals, do household things, and she can maneuver without assistance. In 2009, Heather got sick, so she went back to her family's home in Louisville, Kentucky. When she recovered, she came back to Mobile and moved in to the home of Richard and Ann DeBlaze, along with John, Natalie, and Chase. Remember, that's John's parents. Heather argued with John's mother, Ann, about the proper way to care for the children, asserting superior knowledge on child rearing. Now, mind you, she has no children, and she is arguing with her boyfriend's mother about her grandchildren. Talk about a set of balls on this lady. She was so domineering that Richard, John's dad, told her to get out of the house. On December 23rd, 2009, Heather, John, and the children left Ann and Richard's home and moved in with Dana Mullins. I'm not really sure who this is, but it didn't last long because in January 2010, like the next month, they left her home and stayed several weeks with a friend John knew through wrestling, Robin and his wife Heather Rios, and their children. Now, I'm sure it wouldn't be a bad assumption that Dana made them leave as well. While at Robin and Heather's house, John and Heather argued over Heather wanting to move back to Kentucky. She told the other Heather, which is Heather Rios, that she did not want to raise John's children, but John wanted his kids and her to be a family. The arguments became more heated to the point that Robin and Heather Rios asked them to leave. Heather Rios called Ann, which is John's mom, to tell her that she was worried that John and Heather would not properly care for Natalie and Chase. In early 2010, John called his parents and asked to borrow a car because he wanted to bring Natalie and Chase back to live with him. When his parents talked to him the next day, he said he changed his mind and that he was going to stay with Heather. In February, John, Heather, and the children went over to Robin and Heather Rios' home for a birthday party for one of their children. Chase had diarrhea that day and just smelled horrible, so Heather Rios bathed him. Both Natalie and Chase appeared to be hungry and they ate a lot, so much so that they noticed and they were surprised. This is not normal. They told John and Heather that they needed to take Chase to a doctor. After the birthday party in February, Robin and Heather never saw Natalie again. I wonder why she didn't call CPS, just, for a welfare check. If everything is good, then no worries, right? And if you really love your children, to me, if somebody called CPS on me, I would welcome them into my home. At least somebody cared enough for my children to check on them, Granted, yes, it is an inconvenience, but if there's nothing to hide, then what's the big deal? They come, they check out your home, everything's good to go, and you move on with your life, right? John, Heather, Natalie, and Chase visited Roger Champion and his family in a trailer in the Chalucha area in late January 2010. The Champions were moving to North Alabama and agreed for John to rent the trailer. The night before Roger and his family left, John bought some hamburgers for him and Heather for supper, but only one small salad was given to Natalie and Chase. The next morning, Roger saw the children sharing one of those small individual snack-sized boxes of cereal. You know, those little tiny boxes? John and Roger were loading Roger's furniture into a truck when they heard the children screaming and crying. Roger's wife went in to see what was going on, and Roger's wife told them that she had seen Heather holding Natalie by the hair while she beat her with a belt and while she pushed Chase to the floor. Heather was livid because the kids had eaten a part of her chocolate pie that had been left on the kitchen counter. Roger confronted John and warned him not to let anything happen to those children. John told him that Heather was in charge of disciplining the children and that it was only a spanking. Well, if somebody told that to me, that would have told me that he was just fine with the abuse, and to me that would have sparked a call. The treatment of the children upset Roger's wife so much that she left the trailer, but I guess not enough to call CPS. Roger knew John's parents and called them to say he thought Natalie and Chase were being abused. Roger also called Crichton Hobbs, a mutual friend of John's, and asked him to check on Natalie and Chase after he left the area. Again, why not call CPS? Crichton had previously attended a cookout at Roger's trailer when John, Heather, and the children were there. On that occasion, Crichton had saw Heather abusing Natalie and Chase. Again, nobody called CPS. He saw Heather screaming and cursing the children and violently grabbing Natalie. Heather said the children were just horrible and like demons spawned from hell. Crichton thought Heather's conduct was out of line and wanted her not to treat the children that way or he was going to call the police. John didn't do a damn thing to stop Heather's abuse of the children. Based on his interactions with John and Heather, Crichton felt Heather was the dominant one in the relationship, and John was the passive one. I don't give a shit who was what. Crichton went over to John's in February 2010 to check on the children at Roger's trailer. John was in the floor in pain, and Heather was pissed. Heather said that John's parents and his aunt and uncle had forced entry into the trailer. Really? They're going to force entry? Anyway, that hurt John's ribs, and in the process had pushed her to the floor. In a very agitated manner, Heather, while talking to herself, said, "I hope this baby dies." This is when Crichton realized that Heather was pregnant. Oh, lovely. Crichton took them to the emergency room so John could be checked out, and then took him back home. But while John was being looked at in the emergency room, Crichton took Natalie and Chase to go get something to eat, and the children were extremely hungry. Again, no call to CPS. Soon after that, John advised Crichton that they were moving to Peach Place Apartments. Richard and Blaze testified and recalled things a little differently. They had not seen the children since December 23rd, 2009, and had not given them the Christmas gifts or Chase birthday presents because they didn't know where John was living. But after talking to some of his friends, they learned that they were at Roger's trailer. So in February, they, along with Richard's sister, whose name is Rose, and her husband, they took the kids' gifts to the trailer. Rose knocked on the door and John answered, totally surprised and not in a good way that they were visiting, but he allowed them to come in. He was not pleased, but he let Natalie and Chase open their presents. Heather came in from the back of the trailer and was livid, yelling, "What is that bitch doing here?" referring to Ann, John's mother. So to avoid a confrontation, Ann and Richard left the trailer and waited in the car for Rose and her husband. Now, this is the last time they saw or spoke to their grandchildren. But no fights or anything broke out, and the kids got their gifts, which is what they came for. Again, CPS was not called. Later that month, John, Heather, and the children moved into Unit 41 of Peach Place Apartments. Nicole Conniff was the manager of Peach Place. Many times she saw the children outside the apartment unattended in the parking area right next to a high-traffic street. She and other residents of Peach Place were concerned about the safety of unattended children, and Chase often appeared dirty with a sagging diaper. Then why the fuck does somebody not call CPS? I don't understand. You've got kids out here walking around in a street unattended. You've got a baby in a diaper that's dirty. His diaper is sagging. You've got a lady that sees her pick up a girl by the hair of the head and beat her with a belt as she pushes the other one down. They're starving to death. They eat because they're hungry, and it's so obvious that you notice that it's not normal. I don't understand. Over and over and over again, these kids, they're getting failed. Adult after adult after adult. We are adults. We're supposed to protect these children. Why? Why let it go? The rental agreement at Peach Place allowed access to all units by the manager for the purpose of pest control inspections. One day, Nicole accompanied the pest control inspection to John and Heather's apartment. After knocking several times without a response, Nicole used her master key to enter. Once inside, she saw Natalie and Chase sitting on the floor facing different walls of the living room of the small apartment. Heather came out of the bedroom yelling and cursing the children for letting people inside. The children sat silently, facing the wall, and they were visibly shaking. Nicole told her that the kids did not let them inside, that she used her master key to gain entry. But Heather remained upset. Again, CPS wasn't called. Later, Heather and John came to Nicole complaining about the entry to their apartment, and John was threatening. Occasionally, police units came to Peach Place for various reasons. Every time the police would leave, John would ask Nicole why the police were there. He did this so much that Nicole asked them if he had anything to hide. The first week of March in 2010, Robin and Heather Rios ran into John at Walmart. They asked about the kids and were told that Chase was waiting in the van with Heather, so they went to see him. Once they got to the van, they asked Heather about Natalie. She told them that she was staying with friends. They were shocked by Chase's appearance. He looked emergency room sick. He seemed lethargic and was very pale. They told John to get medical attention for Chase, and John did call an area medical clinic where Natalie and Chase had been treated in the past, but just reported that Chase had diarrhea. The clinic advised he be given Gatorade and to be monitored. This was the last time Robin and Heather saw Chase. Again, CPS. On June 20th, 2010, Crichton called John and asked him what he was going to do with Natalie and Chase for Father's Day. Crichton said he had gifts for the kids and he wanted to bring them over. John said he would call him when he got home, but he never did. Crichton tried to call John after Father's Day, but he would not answer the phone. Is there a flag that something might be wrong? There's a reason why he's not answering the phone? John began going to school at Blue Cliff Career College in Mobile in August 2009 for massage therapy. There he met Renee Pierce. She gave him rides to school and knew he had children that he referred to as my little princess and a little flirt. John took a leave of absence from school from January 14 through March the 2nd, 2010. When he came back to school, Renee noticed he was different. She said he was weird and he was just dirty. It continued to be this way until he dropped out in July 2010. On June 21st, 2010, Heather went with John to class at Blue Cliff. Renee Pierce asked them who was keeping the kids, and he said that they were with a friend. Heather came to school with John several more times and talked with Renee. Renee recalled Heather saying that she did not want to be the mother to Natalie or Chase, and someone needed to teach Natalie that she was not a little princess. She called them the spawn of Satan and referred to her unborn child as the chosen one. Heather was concerned that Natalie and Chase would be jealous of their child. GPS. John and Heather were evicted from Peach Place on July 23, 2010. They left Mobile, Alabama and moved in with Heather's grandmother in Rome, Georgia, but only for a short time, and then moved to Louisville, Kentucky, where Heather's mother, Helena Keaton, lived with her fiancé, Jim Emery. Helena owned rental homes in Louisville where John and Heather lived. Next door to one of the properties, Jim's friend, Les Wilson, and his wife resided. Les Wilson is a retired Metro police officer. On August 25, 2010, Heather gave birth to a daughter. Both Natalie and Chase were dead by that time, and when Helena asked about the children, Heather told her that the children were staying with John's relatives in Las Vegas until they could get settled somewhere. The next day, Helena overheard Heather and John arguing and heard her daughter say, "So you're going to be like that? You're not going to be with me because you love me. You're with me because," and then heard John say, "I'll tell." A few days later, Helena and her fiancé informed the Louisville Police Department that they believed that John had killed 2 of his children, and they wanted them to do a welfare check because they believed Heather was being held captive by John. So officers Christy Hagan and Sean Erie conducted the welfare check. They saw no signs of injury to Heather or signs of a struggle in the residence. Heather said that she did want to leave, but was calm and slow in gathering her things. There were no harsh words between Heather and John sat quietly and just kind of stared out the window. Heather was taken to meet with Lieutenant Thompson. Soon after the officers and Heather left the residence, Les Wilson observed John leaving the apartment carrying a travel bag. On November 14, 2010, while leaving work at the airport, John was arrested for running a stop sign, no vehicle registration, and other traffic violations. He was booked and stayed in jail overnight, and they impounded his van. That same day, Lieutenant Thompson interviewed Heather at his office. She couldn't just answer his questions. Her answers were long, rambling, and confusing. Basically, she portrayed herself as an innocent and handicapped victim of abuse by John, and because of her blindness, wasn't sure to what happened to Natalie and Chase. She states that Natalie had a toxic odor on her breath, lost control of bodily functions, and threw up black stuff. She stated that on March 4th, John left for school and Natalie was put on a tarp in a closet. She became concerned and called John, who said he would check on her when he got home. According to Heather's statement, on his return, Natalie was unresponsive. Heather said Natalie was dressed in red pajamas, put in the back of their van after dark, and driven to a location Heather could not describe. She said John opened the rear of the van and walked into a wooded area, and she assumed disposed of Natalie's body. She stated that on June 20th, Chase displayed the same symptoms as Natalie and became unresponsive. Chase was also put in the back of the van and his body was taken to an undisclosed location. Lieutenant Thompson testified at trial that he believed Heather was untruthful during the interview and was not as naive as she appeared and was calculating when it suited her. Lieutenant Thompson contacted law enforcement in Mobile to tell them about the missing children. Donald Boykin, a former lieutenant in the Homicide Division of the Mobile Police Department, got the information and assigned Sergeant Angela Prawn to investigate. Lieutenant Thompson got Heather's cell phone, and it was examined by a computer forensic expert in Louisville. He was able to obtain the voicemails left by John. And in the voicemail, John professes his love for Heather while crying and saying he's sorry for the way things turned out as they had, and he asked her to call him. When they searched John's impounded van, law enforcement found pictures of Natalie and Chase, their stuffed animals, a duffel bag, and a container of antifreeze. A second search was conducted using cadaver dogs. Both dogs alerted to the scent of a dead body on items in the back of the interior area of the van. Now, 2 weeks later, Sergeant Angela Prine of the Mobile Police Department went to Louisville, and with the information Heather had provided to Sergeant Thompson, obtained a warrant for Heather's arrest on child abuse charges. Following her arrest, Heather provided a statement to Sergeant Prine, and an audio-visual recording of the statement was played for the jury. During that statement, Heather had a different story of Natalie's death than that she had provided to Sergeant Thompson. Heather reiterated that Natalie was throwing up something black a few days before she died, but Heather didn't say that Natalie had been put in a closet while John was at school. She said that Heather claimed that she had asked John to go get Natalie for dinner one evening, but John came back and told her that Natalie was unresponsive and that he was going to have to go back and check on her. After John checked on Natalie, she was still not responding and felt kind of cold, so he asked Heather to get Natalie some warm clothes. However, while Heather was gathering clothes for Natalie, John came back out and said that Natalie was still not responding and that he thought that she was dead. John then told Heather to get in the van, and he drove Natalie's body to a heavily wooded area. As in her prior story, Heather claimed that she did not know what occurred when John got out of the van, and she said that when she asked John what happened to Natalie, John wouldn't tell her and instead told her it's done and don't worry about it. Now, Heather's story of Chase's death was mostly the same account that she provided to Sergeant Thompson. When asked why she did not report the children's death, Heather alleged that John told her that he would kill her if she reported the children's death, and that she had no way to report their death because John had taken her phone. Heather continued saying that she could not report the children's death because John had people watching out for her to prevent her from leaving their apartment while he was away. Sergeant Prime informed her that John's friends had accused her of physically abusing the children, but Heather denied the accusations and claimed that John's friends were all habitual liars who were conspiring against her because she had refused to give them money. I'll let you decide on that one. Now, after the first interview, John was taken to Mobile. On the way, he directed Lieutenant Boykin and Sergeant Prine to an area off Beverly Jeffers Highway in North Mobile County. He said that was the general area where he disposed of Natalie's body. So then they proceeded to Highway 57 north of Mississippi, where John thought he disposed of Chase's body. At the first interview, John began with an outrageous story of how the children got kidnapped on Father's Day during broad daylight by two armed men wearing masks. He quickly changed the story when they told him that Heather had admitted that Natalie died months earlier. John then told a story that somewhat matched later interviews and evidence. He says before he left for school on March 4th, Heather had bound Natalie's arms and legs with duct tape. Natalie could not move her hands or legs apart and was placed inside of a suitcase. The suitcase was open, he said, when he left home, and he saw Natalie before he left and she was alive. The binding with tape and suitcase was Heather's form of discipline for Natalie, just because she needed to change her attitude. She was called Princess by family and friends, and Heather decided that she needed to realize that she was not a princess and that she needed to quit acting like one. John was out of the apartment 12 to 14 hours that day. When he came home, he found the suitcase zipped shut in a closet. Natalie was lifeless, and she was cold and stiff. Her jaw was open, like something had been forced inside of her mouth. Apparently, she was undressed because they decided to dress her in red pajamas and placed her in the back of the van. John drove with Heather and Chase to a wooded area, and John dumped Natalie's body in that area like discarded trash. The reason he didn't call 911, he loved Heather and he didn't want to lose her, Chase, or the new baby. Notice that Heather was first. What a piece of shit. John also admitted that he saw Heather duct tape Chase to a broom handle on the evening that little Chase died. Why? Well, because Heather was mad because he hadn't gone to the potty and he had an accident. So he was taped to the broom handle, was unable to move his arms or legs. The broom was placed in the corner of the bedroom and wedged against the wall by the dresser. A tarp was put under his feet. John took a sleeping pill to help him sleep in the same room where Chase was placed. While he lay all comfy and snug in his bed, his son was in a corner, taped to a fucking broom, upright, dying in the same room, and you lay there peacefully sleeping. Did Satan himself spit you two out of the pits of hell? The next morning on Father's Day, John woke up and Chase is still taped to the broom with a sock in his mouth and tape around his face. Chase is dead. So what does this Father of the Year do? What do you do with a person you love, a child? You put them in a garbage bag, just like you do with your trash. Then you load your trash into your vehicle and you go dispose of it. And that's exactly what this fucker did. And that really pisses me off. John and Natalie and Chase had a strong odor on their breath and throwing out black stuff days before they died, said John. So you didn't find that odd. You didn't take them to the doctor. Why? Do you think they would find out that you were both poisoning them, starving them? Regarding Natalie's death, Heather noticed that a few days before she died, she too said that their breath smelled toxic, kind of like death. And Natalie also began using the bathroom on herself all the time and picked up some black stuff. Heather claimed that she urged John to take Natalie to the hospital, but that John refused. And Heather claimed that she was unable to seek medical attention for Natalie because John would take her phone with him anytime he left the apartment and would physically restrain her if she tried to leave the apartment. Really? I went a little shit. On March 4th, 2010, John was scheduled to attend classes. But Natalie was still using the bathroom on herself, so Heather asked John to stay home from school. But John told Heather that if Natalie was giving her some problems, just put the tarp down in the closet, put Natalie in there for a while, and just put something in front of the door, like a suitcase or the nightstand. Heather claimed, however, it was John who actually put Natalie in the closet because Heather just couldn't lift her. Do you believe that? Well, I don't. Natalie was in the closet maybe just 6 to 8 hours while John was in school. And at some point during that time, Heather heard Natalie crying, "Daddy, Daddy." Oh God, my blood just boils. Heather then went to the closet and told Natalie that John would come back and check on her when he got back, at which point Natalie started to scream louder and louder with a very weird scream that sounded like a drowning and strangled type of scream. Despite Natalie's apparent distress, Heather left her in the closet. And when Heather later checked on her again, she was not responsive. So Heather called John and told him he needed to come back to the apartment and check on Natalie. Oh, that poor baby. My God, I wish I could have them all to myself in a room. When John returned to the apartment later that night, he checked on Natalie and he said that she thought she was unresponsive and asked Heather to leave the room. When he came out, he said he'd done different things and she still hadn't responded, and he thought that maybe she was dead. And so that's when John put her in the van and they drove to the wooded area and he disposed of her. She again says that her lack of vision, she couldn't see, but she assumed that he buried Natalie while she remained in the van with Chase. Regarding Chase's death, Heather noticed that in June 2010, Chase got the same smell on his breath that Heather had smelled on Natalie's breath and started having the same accidents like Natalie did. Heather claimed that given Natalie's recent death, she urged John to take Chase to a hospital, but John refused. One morning later that month, Heather asked John to wake Chase for breakfast, and after John had been in Chase's room for a long time, Heather went in there and said, "What's taking so long?" And John said, "I don't think Chase is responsive." Then he asked her to leave the room again. At some point after Heather left Chase's room, John came out and said he tried everything he could think of, but Chase was also dead. Heather then returned to Chase's bedroom, and she thought she was able to feel Chase breathing and hear Chase trying to moan something, so she urged John to call an ambulance. John told Heather that she was just imagining it because she was upset, and then told her to get in the van, and they drove off again to a heavy wooded area where he presumably buried Chase while she remained in the van. After she was arrested, Heather was taken to Mobile County Jail, and Rosanna Taylor, who was also incarcerated in the jail at that time, testified that Heather would talk to her about the children all the time. Now, this is what they said. Question: what did Heather tell you about the children? Answer: she told me that she fed them antifreeze and cooked for them and John, and they would pre-measure it before she would leave for massage therapy school, and she would pour it in their food. She told me Princess Natalie acted like a princess, and that's how she disciplined the children. And how would she discipline the children? Answer: Natalie would move when Heather was brushing her hair, so Heather would hit Natalie with the brushes several times. Heather told me that her and John would burn the children with cigarette lighters and cigarettes and candle wax. Question: did she say what type of kids they were? Answer: well, she despised Natalie. Question: and how did they cook the food, or how? Answer: in different pots and pans. They each had a set. John and Heather had one set that they would eat their meals in, which the Poulsen would not be in. The antifreeze would not be in there, and then she would cook the children's meals in the other set, and that's where she used the antifreeze. Question: was there any talk about what they would feed the children? Answer: she would at first. They would eat it because I guess that they didn't know the difference, and as time progressed, she would force feed them because they wouldn't take it anymore, and they knew something was wrong, and she said that out of her own mouth, that they knew something was wrong with it, and she would make them eat it, and if they wouldn't, they would get punished. Question: did she say what would happen after they ate the food? Answer: they would throw up black stuff. Question: did she tell you she could smell anything? Answer: they threw up black stuff and they smelled like they were dying from the inside out. Question: did she tell you anything about any antifreeze before? Answer: John would go by and he would measure it out every day before he left, how much to put in each meal. And it wasn't for them to do both of the children, it was for them to do Natalie. But when she passed, Chase became a liability because he kept asking where his sister was. Question: did they ever say anything about them having a dog? Answer: the grandmother had a dog, and Heather told me that John fed it antifreeze to see how long it would take to kill a living thing. Question: talking back about specifically Natalie, did Heather tell you what happened to Natalie when she died? Answer: well, on that day, Natalie was in the bathroom at first because she had lost control of her bowels and she was urinating and defecating on herself. So they put her in the bathroom on an air mattress. And she said that Natalie was crying all day long and she was tired of it. So she called John, and John came home and took Natalie out of the bathtub and went into a room. And she said that Natalie was screaming and screaming and screaming, and finally that it was silent. John came to the door and asked for a change of clothes. Question: what did they do after that? A: they loaded her body up in a van and loaded Chase up and went and dumped her body. Question: after they dumped Natalie, what happened after that with Chase? Answer: they stopped poisoning. They wasn't poisoning him. They were going to keep Chase. Chase wasn't the issue. Question: and then what did she tell you next about what happened with Chase? Answer: about 4 months later, they would go in public. Chase would ask where his sissy was, and that's when she called him a liability and said that they were going to have to start doing Chase. Question: what did they do to Chase? Answer: started feeding him the poison, the antifreeze. Question: and what do you remember about what she said happened to Chase? Answer: Chase would start urinating on himself as well. He was young, so he wasn't fully potty trained then. She told me that he would wear diapers anyway, and she put him in the corner in the living room where the dining room table was supposed to be. She put him in the corner, taped him to a broomstick, and set him on a tarp because he had peed and defecated on himself. Question: did she tell you what she used to put him to the broomstick? Answer: masking tape. Like they used tape, and then they taped his mouth shut so he couldn't cry. Question: did she tell you where Chase died? Answer: I don't recall that. I do recall that she said that they wrapped him up in the tarp that they had him in the corner on when he did pass. That's what they wrapped him up in and loaded him in the van as well. Question: did she tell you how she felt after Natalie and Chase were gone? Answer: they didn't have any responsibilities. John even asked her, could they stop and get this game because they didn't have any more responsibilities? Question: how was her demeanor when she talked to you about these things? Answer: she didn't have any remorse. It wasn't, she didn't get sad. It's like she didn't care. She was not human. Parts of Taylor's testimony were corroborated by other people who had heard Heather make incriminating statements while in the Mobile County Jail. Donna Frazier, who was also incarcerated in the jail, testified that Heather had admitted that she and John got rid of Natalie and had to get rid of Chase or else they were going to be in trouble because Chase cried all the time continuously for his sister. Donna also testified that Heather had told her that Heather's aunt's dog had been poisoned with antifreeze to see how long it would take for antifreeze to kill it. Crystal Arnold, who was also incarcerated in jail, testified that Heather had admitted that she had punished Natalie and Chase by duct taping them to a broom to their backs and making them stand in the corner. LaTonya Jones, a correctional officer at the jail, testified that she had once walked past an area where Heather was already in a conversation with another inmate and had heard Heather say, well, we got rid of the girl first because she was eating too much and then later got rid of the boy. Now, when it comes to John was writing letters. So after his arrest and while in Mobile Metro Jail, John wrote a number of handwritten letters. An FBI handwriting expert authenticated the writing as to John's. The letters were dated between December 8, 2010 and January 2, 2011. Several of the letters referred to an ultimatum from Heather in January 2010 that John chose to be with her or his children. He said that he was blinded by love and chose Heather. He allowed Heather to treat the children as she wished. He wrote the children were beaten with a belt, made to stand in the corner for extended periods, and given poison in their sippy cups to break their spirits. In one letter, John said that he found Natalie taped and gagged and dead in a suitcase on March 4th. Other letters stated she was alive in the suitcase when he found her, and after he asked her why she would not obey Heather, he held her in the air and choked her to death to stop the torture. Several letters also states that he choked Chase to death to stop his being tortured. The letters also describe the disposals of their bodies as described in his statements to investigators. The investigators received these letters in September 2011 from Brandon Newborn, an inmate at Fountain Correctional Center. Brandon was housed in the same wedge as John in the Mobile Metro Jail during the time the letters were written. Brandon had protected John from harassment by other inmates. Along with his fellow cellmate, Kennard Henson, Brandon signed many of the letters as witnesses. Brandon testified that no agreement existed between the DA's office to have the 2 consecutive life sentences he is now serving reduced. Now, on December 4th, 2010, there was an unsuccessful search of the area identified by John north of Valcleve, Mississippi, with cadaver dogs. On December the 5th, 2010, a search was conducted for Natalie's body, but it too was unsuccessful. But on December 8th, Operation Chase was undertaken north of Van Cleve, Mississippi on Highway 57, with 60 to 70 people walking in parallel lines in a grid pattern across the search areas. A search member found scattered human remains in the woods not far from the roadway. Along with the human remains, there were multiple pieces of gray duct tape close to where the skull was located, a white sock attached to the duct tape, pieces of a garbage bag, training pants for a child, and a diaper. There were blonde hairs found attached to the sticky side of the tape. An officer testified at trial that a piece of duct tape was found that, when retaped together, formed the dimensions of a child's head. The duct tape would cover a child's entire face with only the nose exposed. The sock attached to the tape aligned with the location of the mouth. Also, the officer testified that there was evidence of animal activity and chew marks on the tape around the area of the eyes. The state used DNA from a tooth to prove that they were skeletal remains of Chase. A child Chase's age usually has over 240 bones, but the investigators only recovered 21 bones at the scene, including pieces of skull. The bones were found during an exhaustive search. A forensic anthropologist, Dr. Alice Curtin, testified at trial that there was evidence of animal activity and gnawing on the bones. Also, she testified that on the roof of Chase's eye orbit there was a porous bone. She stated that this is usually diagnosed due to anemia, often as a result of malnutrition, and it is a non-specific indicator of poor health. On December the 11th, there was a search for Natalie's remains with 77 volunteers and 4 dogs off of Beverly Jeffers Highway. They did a similar grid pattern and cleared the area. The remains were found close to the road, with part of the skull and lower jaw located underneath the log. Found near the remains were remnants of red clothing. There was a portion of the scalp recovered that was mummified and too hard for soft tissue DNA analysis. Again, the state used a tooth from the remains to prove that they were the remains of Natalie. The search only recovered 68 bones and 3 teeth. Dr. Curtin, the forensic anthropologist, testified that Natalie encountered a period of growth disruption before she died. Both of the femurs and tibia bones showed Harris lines, which are lines of arrested growth on x-rays. Although lines of arrested growth are non-specific as to a cause, but nutritional deficiencies, poisoning, psychological stress, or even high fever can cause them. Dr. Stacy Turner, the doctor who performed the children's autopsy, could not determine the cause of death for either child because of the condition of the remains. The condition of the bones were consistent with bones exposed to the elements for months. She ruled that the manner of death of both children was to be homicidal violence. In 2011, Natalie and Chase's remains were exhumed for testing pursuant to a court order. The bones were tested for ethylene glycol, an active agent, and antifreeze. The forensic toxicologist tested washes and debris from both of the children's craniums. A diaper recovered with Chase's remains, pants recovered with Natalie's remains, and a scalp tissue sample recovered with Natalie's remains, and found no traces of the chemical. The forensic toxicologist gave 4 reasons for the negative result of the testing. Either the methods for testing were not sensitive enough to find the traces of the chemical. 2, that it was never ingested. 3, it was washed away by the elements because ethylene glycol is soluble in water, or it could have been metabolized and left no trace in the body. John's defense was that Heather killed Natalie and Chase. He claimed that he did not actively participate in the abuse or the murder of his children, and that therefore he was not guilty of capital murder, but was at most guilty of reckless manslaughter. John presented evidence indicating that Heather had admitted to a social worker that she had beaten Natalie and Chase with a belt multiple times, and that she believed that it was better for the children to die than suffer abuse. John also presented evidence that he sought medical treatment for Chase regularly, including the day after Natalie was killed in March 2010. In addition, John presented evidence indicating that Heather was the dominant person in the relationship and raised inference that Heather was mentally unstable, and he presented evidence that he was a good father before he met Heather. Well, that you might be the best father in the world before you met her. That's irrelevant. That does not matter. I don't care. You chose to be in a relationship with this bitch, and you put your kids in danger, and you ain't got enough sense to leave her. No, instead you put her in front of your kids, and together you both killed your children. So I don't care if you won Father of the Year last year. or the year before, or whenever you met this thing. That does not matter. You're saying that it's because of her that all this shit happened. You're an adult. You make your own decisions. You chose to be with her. Cynthia Howard, a social worker with the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services, arrived at the Louisville Police Department shortly after Heather's statement to Sergeant Prine and spoke with Heather to get details about what had happened and the possible risk there was to Heather's baby. While speaking with Cynthia, Heather again recounted the circumstances of Natalie's death and the circumstances that were somewhat consistent with the statement that she made to Sergeant Thompson, and that she wasn't feeling herself that day and was begging John to stay home and take care of the children for her, but that John refused to do that, told her to put Natalie in the closet and leave her there, and she did. And while Natalie was locked in the closet, she continued to scream for her dad, and it continued and continued. And then eventually she stopped yelling out for her dad, but she admitted she didn't check on her and that John removed Natalie from the closet when he came home and took her to the bedroom and would not let her go into the bedroom, and came out, told her that Natalie was dead. They put her in the back of the vehicle, took her up there, and he disposed of her. Cynthia testified that Heather was very nondescript about anything to do with Chase and how he might have died. She testified that Heather did admit that they had buried Chase as well. Cynthia also testified that Heather felt John had possibly poisoned the children and specifically believed that John might have given the children antifreeze because Heather had seen John give antifreeze to one of the dogs and enjoyed watching the dog die. A few days after Heather was arrested, John was apprehended in Florida and was extradited to Mobile, and on December 3rd, 2010, he directed law enforcement officers to the general areas of where he had buried the children. At the penalty phase of the trial, John presented testimony from family and friends about his childhood and difficulties in school and about his character. John also presented testimony from clinical neuropsychologist Dr. John Goff. Dr. Goff diagnosed John with schizotypical personality disorder with dependent features. According to Dr. Goff, a person suffering from this disorder has difficulty forming relationships with other people, has difficulty with his or her own identity, and often likes to dress up as other people or characters, and is plagued by social anxiety and is extremely dependent on other people and will go to great lengths in order to avoid being abandoned. Dr. Goff described someone suffering from this disorder as extremely weak, pliable, and dependent. He also testified that John had a low intellectual functioning with a full-scale IQ of 84, a learning disability, and attention deficit disorder. Finally, Dr. Goff testified that Heather had been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, which he said is characterized by a lack of conscience, cold and calculating behavior, over-dramatization, and wild fluctuations in mood. According to Dr. Goff, a person with antisocial personality disorder would take advantage of and dominate someone with schizotypical personality disorder. On May 27, 2015, the jury found Heather guilty of capital murder in connection with Chase's death and guilty of reckless manslaughter in connection with Natalie's death. At the penalty phase of the trial, the jury unanimously found the existence of one aggravating circumstance, that the murder of Chase was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel compared to other capital offenses, and recommended by a vote 11-1 that Heather be sentenced to death. Hallelujah. The trial court followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Heather to death for her capital murder conviction and sentenced Heather to 20 years imprisonment for her reckless manslaughter conviction. Because this case involves the death penalty, the appeal of Heather's capital murder conviction and death sentence is obviously automatic. As for John DeBlaze, he got charged with 3 counts of capital murder, and the jury voted 10-2 on that. He also got sentenced to death in this case, so justice was served in this case, thank God. Of course, you know, they've got rights that they shouldn't have. I mean, granted, they should have a right to one appeal on this, and I think that one appeal should happen within, 5 years at the very longest, and to me, that's too long. After that, I think they should just go ahead and kill them. However, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So they'll have appeal after appeal after appeal after, all that. And then they'll probably be on death row for probably as long as I freaking live, which is stupid. Guys, I can't tell you and stress to you how important it is if you have any idea or if your gut tells you that something is wrong and you suspect child abuse. I'm going to post the child abuse hotline number. That number is 1 800 422 4453. That's 1 800 422 4453. Please put it in your cell phone so that way you'll have it if you're out and about somewhere. Also, you can text the word BEGIN, BEGIN, to 1 800 442 4453. That is text the word BEGIN to 1 800 442 4453. And that wraps up this episode. I do apologize for all the cursing. Cases like this, though, really get to me sometimes. If you like the show, please like, subscribe, and share to all your friends. If you can donate to the show, I would very much appreciate it. Also, you can become a premium member for $7 a month. You get ad-free shows. You also get bonus episodes that the others don't get to hear. This has been a Southern Sass production. And until next time, guys, avoid rest stops and be safe.